20th century begins, the struggle to improve woman's lot with the vote as the ultimate weapon has made few gains. To man, woman is both too irresponsible and too spiritually exalted for self-government. He believes, with 18th century philosopher Rousseau, that woman's sole purpose is to make him happy. She is his status symbol. She should be sheltered from the rigors of life. She is fragile, subject to the vapors. She swoons. For one thing, she sacrifices lung capacity to fashion. After 60 years of petitioning, the vote is as far away as ever. But man forgets that 1 out of 5 women works for a living. What began as piecework in the home moved to the factory in 1790 with the harnessing of water power for manufacturing. By the 20th century, there are 5 million working women in the United States unsheltered from the rigors of life. Among the fortunate, life before the Great War is gracious. For the occasional girl who wants to be a doctor, there are dozens whose main interest is tennis or bird watching. The prosperous go to school to be finished. If they are too learned, their chances for a good marriage diminish. To them, there are things more important than the vote. Female population, neither sheltered nor exploited, neither despairing nor aspiring, life follows a pattern. The path of true love often runs smooth. She keeps company. She gets married to the accompaniment of rice, old shoes, and the usual bad jokes. She goes on a traditional honeymoon to Niagara Falls, and she comes home to live happily ever after in a totally unmechanized house where the only labor-saving devices are her own 2 hands. She does the domestic chores as her mother did before her. Child rearing, family washing and ironing, cooking 3 meals a day, and cleaning up afterward. She reads the Ladies' Home Journal and Frank Leslie's Or she may fret at the limitations for women, but there is little she can do to broaden them. By 1910, 7 million women are working outside the home. Their wages contribute to the economy, but they still have no voice in government. Working conditions are no better, nor is male hostility toward their historic battle for the vote. It all began in 1840. The suffrage struggle was led by Lucretia Mott, a Quaker and abolitionist, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, daughter of a judge. Mrs. Stanton's granddaughter tells why.
The laws in those days were terrible for women. A woman could have an intoxicated husband. She had no right to keep her wages. If they put their wages in a savings bank, they had to get the written consent of their husband before they could take it out. There were, of course, many other laws against women, their property rights, their right to their children. And my grandmother was always listening to the complaints of these women. And finally, one day, she decided that she couldn't stand it any longer. I think she was about 10 years old. And she decided to get some scissors and at night sneak into his library and cut out all the laws that were detrimental to women. And she had set to work right away to mark them in pencil all the way through his books. But somehow, one of the sisters gave her away, and she was called into her father's office. And he explained to her, Elizabeth, you cannot get those laws out of the statute books by just cutting them out of my books. There are lots of books just like them in every other office, and the only way that you can ever get it changed is that you will have to have a law introduced at Albany and get the legislature to change the law.
Elizabeth Stanton does just that. Later, she tries to persuade Congress to enfranchise women nationally. The women continue to campaign, petition, talk, and grow old in the struggle. Mrs. Stanton yields the presidency of the Suffrage Association to aging Susan B. Anthony, for whom the suffrage amendment will be named. In 1900, Carrie Chapman Catt, a newcomer with organizing talent, takes over. There is more new blood. Mrs. Stanton's daughter, Harriet.
It was in 1907 that my mother, Harriet Stanton Blash, conceived the idea of forming an organization composed of self-supporting women. You see, there had been so much talk about women didn't need the vote, that they were not self-supporting, that the men were the breadwinners and they should have the vote. So this is going to be confined to women who stood on their own feet economically, and it was called the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women. And we started in 1907. And that was the first time in many, many, many years, in fact, way back in the 70s, that anything was done towards trying to influence the legislature.
Now the movement begins to be fashionable. So women of the leisure class can join. Mrs. Blatch's Equality League of Self-Supporting Women has to change its name in 1910 to the Women's Political Union. But the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, introduced in Congress regularly every year for 18 years, is no longer even on the congressional agenda. In England, the movement springs to life. After 40 years of boycott by the press, the women stumble upon a secret weapon. Two members of Mrs. Emmeline Pankhurst's Women's Social and Political Union go to a meeting at Parliament to heckle the Liberal Party leader. They get thrown out and arrested. The uproar in the press is tremendous. Now the women begin to provoke police and mob violence for the publicity which they hope will embarrass party leaders into action. Time after time, Mrs. Pankhurst is arrested for inciting to a breach of the peace, for technical assault, or inciting to violence. Later, the women will use violence themselves, setting fire to empty houses, throwing stones, breaking windows, pouring acid into mailboxes. Their hope that the insurance companies which have to pay the damages will bring pressure on the government to enfranchise them. They hope in vain. The arrests continue. Mrs. Pankhurst's daughter Sylvia, Mrs. Pankhurst again, Flora Drummond, Mrs. Pankhurst, and another daughter, Christabel. The government treats them as common criminals instead of political prisoners. Protests continue as the jailed women go on hunger strikes. When prison authorities force feed them, this provokes still more militants. Emily Wilding Davison chooses martyrdom. She throws herself in front of the King's horse at the 1913 Derby. Her role at the occasion, one of the biggest parades. Some American suffragettes try to borrow the British techniques of violent action and militant protest. Looking at the American scene, Harriet Stanton Blatch writes, "A vital idea has been smothered by uninspired methods of work. Alice Paul, like Lucretia Mott, a Quaker, initiates militants in Washington. The movement takes on new life. Women begin to brave men's bailiwicks with their petitions. Garages and barber shops are now open territory, and they make some converts, including a men's league for woman suffrage. American parades now become fashionable as socialites and celebrities flock to the cause. As symbol of femininity, Lillian Russell speaks up for women's suffrage. Many people, though, continue to scoff at suffrage.
Oh dear, what can the matter be, dear, dear? What can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Women are wanting to vote. They are protected. Women have sons by whom they're directed. Women have fathers, they're not neglected. Why are they wanting to vote? Women have homes where they should labor. Women have children whom they should favor. Women are to learn of each neighbor. Why are they wanting to vote? Oh dear, what can the matter be, dear, dear? What can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Women are wanting to vote.
Nevertheless, by 1912, the issue was important enough to warrant a major magazine cover. That same year, Teddy Roosevelt espouses suffrage in his Bull Moose Party platform. As president 8 years before, he has counseled, go get another state. The National Association, headed by Anna Howard Shaw on the left and Mrs. Catt, concentrate their fire on the states. For each victory means more congressmen who will favor a federal amendment. Alice Paul and her militants continue to pressure Congress. But with the coming of war, the picture will change.